Hey, I'm Pops. I want to talk to you about Nefarious. Now, I don't know if you're really that familiar with it. It didn't really stick well in theaters, but it seemed like the word of mouth worked very, very well for the film, and it ended up doing pretty well in theaters. But I just didn't get to it in time, and I definitely want to give a shout out to Anonymous and Gap After Dark, who both told me, "Pops, you're going to love it. You got to get out there. You got to see it. You had a good time." And I did finally get around to seeing it, and I want to go through what I like and don't like before I even get to spoilers. So, before I get too far into things, I want to just point something out. We kind of went over this briefly with another movie, but it definitely applies here, and that is the absurdity that is Rotten Tomatoes. Okay, the critic score is 15 reviews, 33%. Now they don't have a top versus all or whatever. They just have, five. It's five fresh, 10 rotten from the critics. Now look at the audience score, 96 and 97. Okay. That's a lot. That's a big, big gap, right? Um, Spoiler alert, the real number is probably in between, right? But let me get through some of the absurdity of the reviews from these critics that hate on this film. Nefarious is inaccurately described as a horror movie. It's a poorly made psychological drama about death row inmate with no real scares, definitely no real scares, and too much overacting. Well, I totally disagree with the last part of that, but it is not a horror film. It is not, there's no scares. Like it's a psychological drama around an inmate. Death row. That is probably the best way to describe this film, not as a horror movie or whatever. Now, it becomes preachy propaganda for right wing beliefs. Again, it's just her personal opinion. I I get where she's coming from, but I also don't think that she would be able to, in a real life conversation, defend her stance on what is wrong with presenting the way they did. Like, for instance, it's okay to have preachy propaganda from left wing, but not right wing. But the reality is there is at least back and forth in this movie from the other character, the person that's been brought in to do the diagnosis, right? Because that's what this is. It centers around two guys, right? Doc, he's a social psychologist. His name is James Martin, and he's brought in to interrogate this serial killer. His name is Edward, but he's possessed by this demon called Nefarious, right? And the reviews really don't seem to understand how to handle that, right? So there's lots of comments about it's a bait and switch to Christian and conservative propaganda piece. It's a 90-minute sermon on abortion, euthanasia, and death penalty. That's absurd. It's just absurd. I'm sorry, Cody Leach. That's a buffoon. That's a buffoon statement to first off say it's 90 minutes of a sermon. It's clearly there are elements of the conversation that is there, but just the idea that you would have a person on death row who thinks they're possessed and acting this way and saying these things, that is a way that consumes way more screen time than the back and forth on abortion, euthanasia, and death penalty. Absolutely, it's absurd. If you like your demons on the preachy side, okay, that's again, it's so ridiculous. I don't think the demon is ever preachy. I think the demon is being asked why it behaves or does certain things, and then it has its stance, and that's kind of the premise of the story. Heavy-handed and indoctrinating. Bogus message tells us that Hollywood is immoral. Okay, there's like one little line. There's one little part there, like that. That's I mean, literally, that's like one. I mean, that is a blip in the conversation. It's really, really telling. Look at this guy. This guy's completely insane. So, by the way, he says Movie Nation. I'm 99% sure. Let me open him up in a different window. 99% sure this dude is part of the Orlando Sentinel down here. Yeah, he's an Orlando Sentinel guy down here in Florida. I know who Roger Moore is. He is a buffoon. This is absolutely insane. Christo fascist manifesto of a movie is the only thing that they don't talk about is guns. Dude, he's completely insane. He's completely insane. Okay, definitely not horror, which I get that part of it. He's liking it to that, like the Christian horror houses or type of things, whatever. And there's bashing of the creators because they're God's not dead people. and that's fine. So the premise is this, it is a thriller in the sense of like that psychological drama type stuff, but not on the edge of your seat stuff like a Silence of the Lambs or anything like that. It's more of a drama. Let's just be honest. So it's a psychological drama. Death row inmate says he's possessed. Back and forth on why, and should the doctor say he's sane or not is the pivotal point of the show. It's entirely dialogue driven, character performance driven. I think that if you guys don't know or have not really familiar with his work in Boondock Saints, Sean Patrick Flanery is freaking amazing in this film. I think he's incredible. I wish there was actually more Edward to balance some of the Nefarious, because Nefarious is pulled off so well, but I just wish I had a little bit more Edward, because he has these like really nervous and weak, timid ticks and stuff that kind of manifest when he's Edward. I wish there was more of that. I do love the duplicitous of the personality and all of that. I will say too, like Chuck Konzelman, he is one of the co-creators and the writers behind The God's Not Dead and some of the other films he did, like Do You Believe and What If, and then Carrie Solomon also is known as being a writer producer on those kinds of things. All of that is fine, and I thought they did a fine job directing the film. I don't think this film is nearly as heavy-handed as those critics think it is, or as God's Not Dead is. God's Not Dead, to be honest, my criticism of not God's Not Dead, which I've never done a video on this, it dates back to me writing an article on this, was that people were so obsessed with the message, just like they are with this film, that they're not even critiquing any of the elements of the actual film. Like they're talking about the messaging. Like, you shouldn't be talking about abortion this way, it's biased. You shouldn't be talking about this. And it's like, well, what are you talking about? Like there are issues with the film. So, all right, I'm going to get into some spoilery stuff. I can say this though. I think if you can enjoy like that type of dialogue driven film and have some thought provoking conversation, because I thought the psychiatrist does a pretty good job of trying to have a back and forth with him about a few of these things. The only time I thought, well, okay, so definitely spoilers now. It doesn't work. The first little bits definitely work well. It kind of goes bad for me when they get to he knows the girlfriend is at like a Planned Parenthood place. The girlfriend is in the middle of having a procedure done, right? And the psychiatrist, James Martin, does he call him James? He calls him Martin a lot. I don't know. Anyway, how do you know my girlfriend's name? What do you mean you talk about my girlfriend? And then the demon already says he's got another lady. Like, I'm not even sure why. It's like it's not played up enough of like, oh, you don't have a problem killing your son. You don't have a problem, your son can be murdered on an altar just so you can continue to go on with the convenience of your life. And you can cast this girl aside. That would have been, I think, a little bit better and nuanced, but also, again, it's going to be heavy handed. You're not allowed to talk about all this. Let's just be honest. These guys also are behind a movie called Unplanned, which is a movie that I was going to sort of highly recommend with my Christian faith movie list or whatever, because I felt Unplanned actually it's Abby Johnson's true story, and it deals with this topic very much so. And I thought that the biggest criticism of that film, and by the way, that film was purposely made rated R just so they could keep people from seeing it, because they knew a lot of people wouldn't go because they don't want to go see rated R films. And that was literally just like 2 or 3 shots in the film with like there is more blood on like generic TV, like primetime TV, than there was in this movie. It was totally an agenda move, right? I feel like Nefarious at times feels kind of just tedious, and I don't want to say boring, but you're just like you know where things are going. You kind of know how things are going to play out. I thought there was a little bit of like the weird thing about the book at the end of the movie, this third act where you get to this dark gospel book and he's going to write the equivalent of a Bible and all of that. I don't know. I just didn't really care for any of that. I thought it was just a weird dynamic that was shoehorned in just so they can have an excuse to include Glenn Beck at the end of the movie, which, gotta be honest, that was the worst part of the movie. To me, the worst part of the movie was like this epilogue, like like Martin is on Glenn Beck's show talking about this book, but he rewrote the book. It's not really a how-to book. It's really like a warning book. And I'm like, oh, that was just did not like the ending. Did not like the Glenn Beck part at the end. Glenn Beck being on the radio in the first part of the movie was fine, but him at the end did not work. The best part of the movie, I know this is going to be extremely nitpicky, but in a positive way. The fact that the demon would refer to the carpenter and not Jesus by name was fantastic. The fact that the demon understands that the death penalty in the chair is almost as bad as any other way to die, except for the cross, is also brilliant. Like those little things like that, I think is again speaking to the choir, but I think are also very interesting to have conversations about, but we're not allowed to have those kind of conversations. So this is the area of like faith-based Christian filmmaking that I wanted this film to get credit for. One, it did get into a little bit of a darker space with at least I don't want to say a horror genre, but at least it got a little bit edgier. We have to give it at least a little bit of credit for that, right? Then two, it starts to at least having concepts and conversations about things that they don't want to talk about, which is to me what we need to do. Like I shouldn't have to only live under the rules and the guise of what they want to have conversations about. I just don't. I think it's silly. And the biggest positive to me was at least we're having some conversation like that. I liken this, my wife, very much to there is a theater guy named Max McLean, and he does T.S. Eliot work and screw tape letters and things like that. And they're always like this. There's these highbrow spiritual conversation starters, things like that. So let me just touch on a little bit of the footage with you and get through something here that we can maybe kind of enjoy a little bit. We'll see. We'll see. There's Martin. This is in that second act when he's calling for the girlfriend, trying to call the clinic. Some of that stuff didn't really work for me too much. It's okay. And by the way, this actor, his name, sorry, I forgot, Jordan Belfi. He does not look like he has smoked before. Someone should have told him, hey, by the way, can we like not do the cigarette thing? Because he does not look like he smokes cigarettes. It did not look right. It was very distracting. So this is Sean, and he's fantastic.
I'm not Edward. I'm a demon.
Demons aren't really a thing.
So it was really good. And I love the fact that most of the critics actually respond like the character in the movie. And I don't think they understand that. Like, it just seemed like it's a very interesting thing that you guys do realize that part of your response was not a critique of the movie. It was sort of like this political elite looking down, scowling down at the audience and the filmmakers that you know better than the film, what it was trying to say. You didn't actually point out any interesting conversation. Like you should say, oh, well, this was not a good point. This was a really silly plot point, whatever. I thought that this whole book thing, which is what that shot was, by the way, I shouldn't have hit it. Where they searched, I did not like this. I just thought this was all like, I wish that maybe this was included in the first part of the prison sequence, and then they'll have a callback to it. Like now you know why he has the book or why they found it. Or how about this? We didn't need to have the other doctor and have the other doctor commit suicide. They found the book. The book has this guy's name on it, so they want to bring him in because he happens to be a psychologist and he can be the person that they want to do this or whatever. I don't know. It just like I don't know. So yeah, the cutting off of the hair stuff, I thought there was like too much conversation. Sometimes the meal stuff was a little too much. But look at how different he looks in just the shots in the trailer. They have it. He does a really, really good job in this movie. Yeah. Oh, that was good. Oh, that's fine. I'm going to say a very, very strong 3, probably a 3.5. I think that if you are really hung up, there's another movie called An Interview with God, which is pretty much the exact same concept. It's like a dude who doesn't believe anything, sits down with God, having a conversation back and forth over different theological and serious, philosophical concepts. And if you're not into believing those certain things, it's like you can just shut yourself off. Whereas a movie like this should be at least a way to have conversation. Okay. Maybe you could understand the other side a little bit too, by the way. We're constantly bombarded with what one side believes and says, maybe you'd understand the other side's perspective a little bit better. And maybe you can agree to disagree. Like we could just part ways and disagree about something, but it does not appear to be the case. And this movie was definitely an example when critics are giving it, first off, a 33. People are giving it like a 1, and that's just silly. It's just silly. It's like someone giving it a 9. Giving it a 9 is ridiculous. Guys, stop, please. Please. This movie is like a 7 on the high end. It's probably more like a 6. This is a 3-star, 3.5-star film. Kind of depends a little bit on some of that nuances. And it's also like there's no action at all. It's just people sitting around like talking. So that's just that is a huge negative for a lot of folks. So I can see that being more take away a star or so for you if you're like that. I mean, it may not be. It's not definitely not really a movie for you. So anyway, that's my take on it. I enjoyed it. I would probably rewatch it. I definitely will rewatch it with Mrs. Pops. But I appreciate the recommend and keep them coming. Thank you so much. I am Pops.
Yeah. Right?